Welcome to today's podcast. And today I want to start with the following statement. Clean data doesn't start with AI. It starts with trained humans, trained users. Now, before people are going to jump to the conclusion, I think this is going to be an anti-AI episode. That's definitely not going to be the case. I think AI is incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. I think tools like Agentforce within Salesforce can generally change how people work, how teams work, how businesses use Salesforce within their organization. But I still think the situation that I talked about in the middle of 2025 through a viral LinkedIn post, it's still the same now as it was back then. And that is that most businesses are nowhere near ready for AI. And that is not because they have bad tech stack or because their Salesforce is missing features, but it is the real foundation to everything, and that is that their data is a mess. And more importantly is the way users create that data. That is messy. And so what I want to talk about in this podcast is why AI won't magically fix that dirty, messy data, how bad habits get created in the first place, and more importantly, how training, education, and enablement can lay a real foundation to, first of all, clean up the data, but then also create clean data in the future. Now, let's start with one of the biggest things first, and that over the years, Salesforce has really been promoting Agentforce as sort of this miracle solution. And people start to believe along the way that once we turn on AI, all these data problems will go away or they all get magically fixed. Now, that won't happen. AI in itself is not going to fix bad data. It amplifies what you already have. So if you have inconsistent data, if you have incomplete data, if you have users, different ways of entering information, if the way the users use the data or use the system that is filled with guesswork, shortcuts, or maybe even copying bad information, AI in itself is not going to clean that up. AI will learn from it, it will repeat it, and in a very bad situation, it actually will scale it. And then all of a sudden you have these situations where, for example, you get very bad dashboards. And the AI is going to give you answers in a very positive, confident way and saying, your system is telling you this. Well, actually, it does that on wrong assumptions. And then as you as an organization make decisions based on wrong assumptions, but you will believe AI as the truth of your information. And so that is not intelligence, that's automation of chaos. And that, I think, is where some of the problems with Agentforce comes from and where Agentforce gets misunderstood. Because Agentforce itself will assume that the fields mean what they think you mean. So if I put an answer in there, it will think that answer will be correct. It will also think that your users enter the data intentionally. It will think the users know what they're doing. They will know what to put in there. It will be the truth what they put in there. It will assume that your processes are consistent. That doesn't matter where you are in the organization, whichever user you are, you all follow the same line of thought, the same way of entering data, following the same processes. And with it also that you use the same definitions. And unfortunately, most organizations, that is just not the case. There is inconsistency within teams, between teams. There is all this information out there, and people have found their own ways of using the system. And so that means that most data qualities are created by the people, not the system. Now, not necessarily 100% true, but it is the foundation. But up to a point, Salesforce sometimes also can create some of the confusion. If we do a bad implementation, if we create confusion about what fields mean or how processes work, then of course our users, will do wrong things. But the core of everything is that if information is edited wrongly, it's driven by the users. Sometimes they just guess which field to use. If they open an opportunity and they see 40 fields, they'll just guess which one to use or what to put in there. They might skip some of those because they think, well, yeah, it's not really important or whatever. I just put something in there. If you have validation rules or you have compulsory fields and people don't necessarily know the answer at that moment, they might just start putting in gibberish. Just type something in so they can continue to the next step. Maybe they're using old information, old records that they're copying in and they're starting to use. But back then, maybe the data was wrong. Things have changed. They might also enter in data differently depending on time pressure. end of month situations, you want to hit your target. You need to close off as much information. There'll be cases of opportunities. People under that time pressure will try to do everything and anything to close stuff off just to continue. And it's all not because they are lazy or because they are stupid. A lot of it is down to a couple of different things. Now, first of all, they might just not have been trained properly. They have not been explained why the data matters, why it's important for them to fill in the right information. They might also don't see the downstream impact. If they put in a wrong field or they put in wrong data in there, they might not understand that in the end drives down to bad strategic decisions, or it impacts how AI will work or how processes work. And in a lot of the cases, for a lot of users, they might feel that Salesforce is more like an admin and not like a tool, not something that they can benefit from. And so what the users will do, they will go for speed, and they just want to get the tasks done. They don't think about data quality, let alone thinking about AI readiness or future reporting. They just want to get the job done now, because that's their priority, because they need to hit their targets, they need to hit their KPIs. They get the manager on their back and saying, why haven't you done X, Y, and Z? Why have we still so many tasks open, so many cases open? So they just don't think, they go quick, and they don't really understand the impact of it at the end. And that's why AI will not help you solving the problem out of these bad habits. So, we have to start with, thinking first about how do we solve this. A lot of people think like, well, we'll clean the data later. Maybe when we roll out AI, that's when we're going to look at it. Or maybe we're going to retrain people the moment AI comes in, then fix everything in one go. And that's backwards thinking. Because once AI is live, it becomes really difficult to trace bad data. Errors get buried into all the outputs that you're getting. Potentially your trust starts to erode because people think they've done something. They're going to get AI else and they think like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why is it telling me X, Y, and Z? Users are then going to blame Salesforce instead of actually thinking about, well, hang on a minute, maybe we have given it wrong information. And the problem is, once trust goes, once people start to doubt how the system works, your adoption will start to fall. Now, we've talked about it in other sessions. And once adoption falls, it's going to be really, really difficult to get that back up, especially also when trust is gone. Fixing trust issues is incredibly challenging, especially if Salesforce is going to be your day-to-day foundation for people to use, how people will operate. And with it, you will get that AI will start to fall, your agent source will start to fall. And it will start falling slowly and subtly in the background. It's not this big, oh, this is a disaster, everything stops. It's these little things that are creeping in, these little messages that are popping up that, well, actually, this is not really working. And like I said, clean data is the foundation to everything. That's not the same as perfect data. When I talk about clean data, I'm not talking about every single field has answers. I'm not talking about enormous amount of validation rules or over-engineered processes. What I am talking about with clean data is that users understand what they are entering. They understand why they're entering, why it matters for them, but also for the organization. And they also understand when accuracy is really critical. And they need to have the confidence that they know the what, the why, and the when, so that when they use the system, they get the right answers. And that is where training comes in. And not something very generic, but it's capability-built training. Making sure we have clear definitions. Everybody understands what is an account, what is a lead, what's an opportunity. We use the same language. When I say an opportunity is closed, we all talk about the same thing. If we say an account is a prospect, we all know what we mean. If you talk about the specific fields on an account, we all understand what we're talking about. We also make clear that we have very role-specific expectations. Who is responsible for what? Who is responsible for which information in the system? Is, for example, everybody allowed to create accounts, or is only maybe finance allowed to do it? Because they, in the end, maybe have a backup to another system. And in everything, we need to make sure we have real examples so people understand what they're doing and why they're doing, how it relates to their work. Because if users don't understand the purpose of the data, they will never think about the quality. And so this is the part where, AI and AI conversations just get skipped completely. And I've seen it in organizations where they're just going to talk about, let's talk Agentforce. Let's talk about how these solutions are. And maybe even think, well, maybe we start using AI as training. And the challenge with that is training isn't about just clicking a range of buttons in Salesforce. It's not about memorizing screens or memorizing steps. And it's definitely not just watching a 45-minute recording once or having these lengthy messages that they can look at. Training for clean data is all about, let's go to the users and explain, first of all, why did we start using Salesforce? Why do we as an organization use Salesforce? How does their input drive decision? Why is it so important, for example, that we don't have opportunities in the past, or that we have correct values in there or the correct products against? Why is it important that for accounts we have, for example, the right location, the right hierarchies implemented? It's important that we then link the correct data to real outcomes. If you don't have the correct information here, this is your impact. You as a user will see it because you don't hit your KPIs, or you might not get your bonuses paid. We as an organization will see these and these problems. As an organization, you might not invest in certain areas, and you as a user, therefore, might not get the right training or the right opportunities. And the training on clean data is also about building confidence. It's not just about compliance training. And so when we do training well, users will stop guessing. They will stop using workarounds. They stop thinking about shortcuts. And they also will stop seeing Salesforce as an admin. They will really see it as a useful tool for their day-to-day business. And when that happens, not all of a sudden, but gradually, your data quality will improve. Because people are no longer forced to do something. They'll certainly start to understand why they're doing it and why it impacts them. And that is when we then start talking about AI. Because AI then becomes useful, because then you're ready for it. Because you have consistent data, consistent behavior, and aligned processes. At that stage, that is when you can start implementing AI, not before that. And so a couple of final thoughts on this. The main thing is AI is not your starting point. AI is the amplifier. If you start with confusion, you create faster confusion. If you start with bad habits, you're going to create a mess. You want to amplify clear processes. You want to make sure you have trained users, shared understanding, and clear intentional data. Once you have that, then your AI will be really useful for you as an organization. And then you can start to think, which AI tools should I start to use? So think about, before you start talking Agentforce, before you start talking AI, can you answer these following questions? Do your users understand the data they create? Have we trained them for clarity, not just for users? And is there confidence in the platform? Because if you can't answer a clear message to any of these three, then pause your AI, pause your Agentforce, answer these questions, and definitely start with training your users. If you want help with training your users, please feel free to connect to me. I'm on social media, I'm on LinkedIn, always happy to help people in getting understanding how they can train their users and what good training looks like. And you will need it, because AI is the future. It's coming. And it's coming fast, and it's coming in a big way. And you have to be ready for that. But you're ready to start with well-trained users that know how to use the system, and make sure that your data in the system is consistent and correct and clean. So that when AI comes, you have confidence that at least the answers AI is going to give you is the answers you are looking for. I hope you like the podcast. Please feel free to comment as usual. And if you want any other topics for me to talk about in the future, please let me know. Looking forward to see you next time.